Intimacy, activity without touching. When everything happens together except the one thing that brings you home. There are lovers who plan everything, who are there for the dinners, the road trips, the renovations, the weekend errands. They show up fully. The relationship works. There is momentum, partnership, reliability. From the outside, it looks like harmony in motion. But when you lean in, when you reach, when your hand grazes theirs, they don't reach back. They don't pull you close on the couch. Don't rest their hand on your knee during the movie. Don't wrap themselves around you after a hard day. And slowly, the partnership begins to feel like choreography. Always in step, never in contact. At first, you don't notice. You're busy. You're building something. You feel cared for in practical ways. They help with the groceries, fix your car, book the flights. But then a moment arrives. You have a quiet ache in your chest, and all you want is their arms. Not advice, not a plan, not a task, just skin, just warmth. And when it doesn't come, when they say, "I'm here, what do you need?" but never move toward you, something inside you starts to question if being close is enough when you're never gathered. They share a bed with you, but your bodies live on separate islands. They make you laugh over dinner, but never graze your back as you walk past. They say, "I love you," but don't kiss your shoulder in passing. And at some point, you stop reaching. Not because you don't want it, but because the absence has made your desire feel lonely. Reaching without response is its own kind of heartbreak. And now your body knows better than to ask. Sometimes they say, "We're so busy, I'm just tired." And you believe them. Life is full, but it's never too full to reach across the center console, or press your palm against theirs while standing in line, or brush the hair off your face before bed. These aren't grand gestures, they're anchors. And without them, the relationship becomes like a fast-moving car with no seatbelt. Constant motion, no safety. You start doing things without thinking, resting your foot next to theirs, leaning into them while waiting for the elevator. And they don't move away, but they don't move closer either. It's like you're touching a wall painted with kindness. Beautiful, but cold. Their body is near, but never involved. And it begins to feel like their love is fully expressed through activity, never through affection. You plan an entire day together. You go to the farmer's market, clean the apartment, cook a beautiful meal. You laugh, you talk, and when the day ends, you reach for them under the blanket. They shift slightly, then fall asleep. And you lie there, heart full of all the things that worked, and skin aching with all the ways you still feel unheld. You bring it up, gently. "I miss touching you." They nod. "I'm not the most physical person, you know that." And you do. But knowing doesn't erase the ache, doesn't soothe the silence where your bodies used to speak. And suddenly, every moment of togetherness feels like it's happening beside you, not with you. A dance you're both in, but never touching hands. Eventually, your body goes quiet. You stop dressing up just to feel desired. Stop reaching across the couch. Stop leaning your head on their shoulder while they drive. Not because you've fallen out of love, but because love without touch becomes memory. And memory, when unreturned, becomes grief. A grief that builds slowly, invisibly, until even the most connected day ends in your chest with the whisper, "Why do I still feel alone?" And perhaps the most painful truth, when someone shares your life, your goals, your schedule, but not your skin. You are not unloved, but your body is unjoined, and that separation doesn't look like absence. It looks like partnership, like participation. But when there are no arms, no fingertips, no spontaneous warmth, even the most devoted relationship becomes distant. Because love without touch is like a house with no furniture. It shelters, but it never lets you rest. She's sitting next to him on the couch, their knees almost touching. They just spent the whole day together. Ran errands, cleaned the house, made dinner. It was good. Full of ease, cooperation, movement. But now it's quiet. She leans slightly toward him, craving contact without words. He scrolls on his phone, doesn't move closer, doesn't rest his hand on her thigh, doesn't notice. And in that stillness, she realizes they did everything together today except touch. He wakes up before her, starts the coffee, feeds the dog, opens the blinds. The house hums with presence, with care. She smiles when she enters the kitchen, says good morning, and wraps her arms around his waist. He stiffens just enough to remind her. He's never quite learned to lean back. He says morning, gives her a quick peck, and continues on. She doesn't say anything, but later she feels a strange loneliness, one that exists inside a life full of love, yet empty of reach. She buys a new sweater, soft, a color he once said he liked. She wears it on their date night, lets her hand rest on the table near his. He compliments her food choice, mentions the playlist, but never reaches across, never traces the line of her wrist with his fingers like he used to. She doesn't ask why, just folds her hands in her lap and keeps talking. Her body starts to learn. He's here, but not with me. Sometimes, he drives them somewhere and talks the whole time, about work, their plans, what they need from the store. She listens, nods, engages. At one red light, she rests her hand on his arm. He doesn't pull away, but he doesn't respond either. No thumb across her knuckles, no glance, just more words, more motion. And she sits in that silence, realizing her affection has become background music in his presence, heard, but never answered. He always helps, fixes what breaks, carries the heavy bags, does the dishes. She thanks him often, tells him he's her rock. But the rock never holds her back, never wraps her in his arms after a long day, never kisses her shoulder while she stirs soup. She's grateful, deeply, but her body keeps asking the same quiet question, where is your skin? One night, she turns toward him in bed, slides her foot against his, hoping to wordlessly ask for closeness. He shifts away in his sleep. She doesn't try again, just stares at the ceiling. Not angry, just aching in that quiet, invisible way that only skin-deep love can create. He's next to her. They've shared a life, a bed, years. But her body is lonelier now than it was when she slept alone. She cries while watching a movie, not loudly, just a few tears falling gently. He glances over. You okay? She nods. He smiles and looks back at the screen. Doesn't pull her in, doesn't brush her cheek, doesn't pause the film to just hold her. And in that moment she realizes, he sees her emotion, but he doesn't touch it. And that hurts more than being unseen, because it means he saw and still didn't move. They celebrate something small, good news from work. He cheers with her, opens a bottle of wine, puts on her favorite song. But when she stands and reaches for him, hoping for a dance, he laughs it off, says, let's just enjoy the music. She sits back down, smiling, sipping slowly. But inside, her longing is learning how to stay quiet, because even in joy, her body isn't met. And perhaps the deepest kind of ache, when the relationship is full of doing, of effort, of intention, of shared life, but never full of touch. You are not unloved, but you are unheld. Your body goes days without being reached for. Your skin becomes something that only waits, and that waiting, silent, patient, invisible, becomes its own kind of sorrow. Because love that never arrives in the hands, the arms, the chest, eventually becomes a ghost. Always beside you, never fully with you. Intimacy, activity without sensate. When you're always doing together, but they never truly perceive you. There are lovers who show up in every visible way. They plan the vacations, help with the dishes, coordinate the calendar, text back quickly, keep everything moving. The relationship looks solid, dependable, active, full. But in the middle of all that motion, something vital is missing: perception. They don't notice when your laugh is a little off. Don't catch when your silence isn't peace, but withdrawal. They do everything with you, but feel nothing through you. And slowly, you begin to feel like a participant in a partnership where your soul is present, but invisible. At first, it feels like stability. You're grateful for the reliability, the structure. There's always someone next to you, sharing the day. But then you notice how often your feelings are subtle, how often you hope they'll ask, "What's under that?" And they don't. You pause in the middle of dinner, a little lost in thought. They keep talking. You go quiet in the car, and they change the playlist. The absence isn't loud. That's what makes it ache. It's the lack of noticing that starts to feel like erasure. You wear something that means something. Your mother's old earrings, the scarf you wore on your first date. They don't say anything. You shift your energy after a hard day, trying to hold it together. They don't ask, "Are you okay?" They say, "Don't forget we have that thing later." Their attention is on what's next, never on what's here. And you begin to feel like your internal weather doesn't matter unless it disrupts the plan. You bring it up gently. "Sometimes I feel unseen," you say. They're surprised. "But we do so much together." And they're right. You do. But togetherness isn't the same as attunement. You don't want more activities. You want them to feel you, to notice the micro movements in your expression, the flicker of your discomfort, the tiny shifts that say, I'm not fully okay. Instead, you get shared tasks, shared spaces, shared calendars, but not shared awareness. You try offering clues. You get quiet, hoping they'll check in. You bring up something vulnerable, hoping they'll linger. But they nod, respond with logic, and keep moving. You begin to feel like a painting hung in a hallway, admired in passing, but never truly studied. Your inner life becomes a language they don't stop long enough to learn. They say, you know I'm here, and you know they are. But it's not their absence that hurts. It's their unpresence. The way they never pause long enough to feel into you. You sit beside them every night, but when you change, subtly, deeply, in mood or spirit, they don't catch it, and your longing, once vivid, starts to hide. Eventually, your own attention turns inward. You stop performing your feelings. Stop trying to get them to notice. You handle yourself. You self-regulate. You become efficient inside the relationship, not because you want to be, but because it's the only way to survive, being perpetually unread. The pain isn't just in being unseen, it's in being constantly almost seen. You begin to miss being mirrored, miss being surprised by their insight, miss the feeling of someone catching the thing you didn't say. Instead, your experience feels like something you have to narrate in order for it to be real. And that kind of labor, the effort of always translating yourself, starts to feel like isolation disguised as intimacy. And perhaps the most devastating kind of disconnection, when someone is physically there, always active, always doing, but never tuned in. You are not unloved, but you are unfelt. And that loss doesn't show up in arguments. It shows up in silence, in longing. In the invisible weight of being with someone who does everything around you, but never truly sees through you. Because love without perception is just proximity. And even the most consistent presence will eventually feel empty if it never stops long enough to look closely and feel deeply. She stands beside him in the kitchen, moving slowly, unusually quiet as she stirs the soup. It's been a long day, the kind of day that settles into her shoulders like lead. He talks cheerfully about the podcast he listened to, doesn't notice that she hasn't smiled, doesn't see that her stirring is rhythmic, not relaxed. She sets down the spoon and says, I'm just going to lie down for a bit. He says, okay, call me if you need anything. But what she needed was someone who didn't have to be called. He brings home flowers, not because it's her favorite kind, or because of anything that happened, but because it was Friday. A kind gesture, patterned like clockwork. She smiles, kisses his cheek, and thanks him. But that night, when she's sitting on the porch with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes fixed on nothing, he doesn't follow, doesn't sit beside her, doesn't ask. The flowers were love in form. But love in presence would have meant sitting there, noticing, feeling. She shares something that mattered, a poem she wrote after a nightmare, raw and strange. She places it in his hand. He reads it slowly, then says, that's really good, and hands it back. No question, no pause, no reaching into her world. The moment closes. She nods, folding it away. Not because she feels rejected, but because she knows now. He sees, but he doesn't feel. And her vulnerability becomes something she keeps locked behind glass. They go on a weekend trip. The itinerary is full. He's excited. She's there, present, trying to meet his energy. But on the second day, something shifts in her, quietly. She looks out at the lake longer than necessary, lingers in the shower, talks less. He doesn't ask, doesn't slow down, doesn't sense that her silence is saying, I'm not okay. And she realizes he's great at doing. But he never feels her drift. Only hears her when she disappears completely. Sometimes she wears perfume that matches her mood, warm and earthy when she needs grounding, soft and floral when she's feeling tender. She hopes he'll notice. He never does. He kisses her like routine, tells her she smells good, but never pauses to say, you smell different today. Are you feeling different too? And it's not about the scent. It's about sensing, about being read without needing to explain. He says, I love you, at all the right times, kisses her goodnight, hugs her before work. But he doesn't notice when she flinches slightly during arguments, doesn't see how her eyes dart away when he changes the subject too fast. He hears the words, but not the silence beneath them. And she starts to feel like her pain is only real when spoken clearly. not when whispered through gesture, expression, or breath. She gets quiet after dinner, curled up on the couch, legs folded, arms tight. He keeps watching the show. Every now and then, he laughs. She waits, just a little longer, for him to notice the change in her energy. To pause and say, "You've gone somewhere. What's happening in there?" He doesn't. Eventually, she says she's tired and goes to bed early. He follows later, gently, but by then, her tenderness has already curled in on itself. She tries one night to explain, "I don't always want to say how I feel. Sometimes I want you to just feel it." He nods, says he'll try, but the next time she's hurting, he asks, "You seem off. What's going on?" And she knows he means well. But the asking isn't the wound, it's the delay. The way she always has to spell herself out, like she's never allowed to be a poem, only a paragraph, read aloud. And perhaps the most haunting heartache, when someone shares your life, your bed, your routine, but not your frequency. You are not unloved, but you are unfelt. You are engaged with, but not tuned into. And the pain isn't loud, it's slow, subtle, a longing that builds beneath the surface, where your spirit waits to be noticed not just in form, but in essence. Because love that can't perceive becomes love that can't reach. And even the closest touch feels far away when no one is really looking. Intimacy, activity without growth. When the relationship keeps moving but never evolves. There are lovers who do everything together. They book the trips, host the dinners, keep the calendar full. Their life together is full of motion. Plans made, tasks completed, boxes checked. It's an active partnership, a rhythm that feels productive, functional, even comforting. But slowly you begin to realize everything is happening, but nothing is changing. You're always doing, but never becoming. And over time, the movement starts to feel more like circling than forward motion. At first, it's energizing. There's always something to focus on. You feel like a team. You're building something. At least it seems that way. But eventually, the conversations repeat. The same patterns show up in conflict. The same silences fall in the same places. You try to bring something deeper, new questions, new desires, new ideas, but they're deflected. "We're doing fine," they say. "Why dig all that up?" You suggest therapy, a retreat, even a quiet night to talk intentionally. They laugh. "We're not one of those couples. We're solid." And they mean it. You're not in crisis. But you're not growing either. You live in motion. Events, errands, achievements, but the emotional soil never gets tilled. The roots never deepen. You're living side by side, but not evolving in how you meet each other. They do all the things. Pick up dinner when you're tired. Plan the weekend. Remember the family birthdays. But they don't ask what scares you lately. Don't sit with you in discomfort without trying to fix it. Don't initiate the hard questions. What's changing in you? What's calling you forward? How can I meet the new parts of you before they feel like strangers? Instead, they hand you a to-do list and call it connection. When tension builds, they pivot to action. Book something fun. Suggest a distraction. "Let's just do something," they say. But doing isn't healing. Doing isn't evolving. Doing is what they know how to offer. And your soul, longing for transformation, keeps waiting in the wings, wondering if love that doesn't stretch is still love that will last. Sometimes you try to pull it forward. You say, "I want to grow with you." They respond, "We already are. We've done so much." And you realize they think growth means doing more. You meant becoming more. You meant being stretched. You meant building new emotional muscles, not just new schedules. And in that difference, something sacred begins to stall. You start to feel stuck, not in the relationship, but in yourself. Because you are still moving, still changing, still reaching, but the partnership doesn't meet you there. It keeps repeating, keeps cycling, keeps managing the outer world while avoiding the inner one. And slowly, you begin to feel alone inside something that never stops including you, but never invites you to become more. Eventually, your spirit begins to press against the container, not because you want to leave, but because you want to expand. You want intimacy that doesn't just function, but transforms. Love that grows not just through shared life, but through shared depth, shared discomfort, shared becoming. And perhaps the most difficult kind of loss, when everything in the relationship still works, but nothing really moves. You are not uncared for, but you are unstretched. You are loved in rhythm, but not in evolution. And love that never invites you to change will eventually ask you to shrink, not through rejection, but through repetition. Because movement without growth is just motion, and motion without meaning becomes a beautiful life that never truly deepens. She sits across from him at their favorite restaurant. It's their anniversary. They order the same wine they always do, laugh at familiar jokes, exchange gifts, safe, sweet, expected. But when she starts to say, "This year I've been thinking a lot about who I'm becoming," his face flickers. He smiles and says, "I'm just glad we've stayed steady." She nods, drinks the wine. But inside, she feels the subtle ache of being met with stability when she was asking to be met in evolution. He's amazing at logistics, plans every trip down to the hour, keeps the house in order, shows up for dinner with her friends, for her parents' birthdays. But when she tries to talk about shifting values, about how she's questioning parts of her faith or rethinking her work, he changes the subject. "Let's just enjoy the weekend," he says. And she realizes that everything is moving except the relationship itself. Their love is full of motion, but emotionally motionless. They've been having the same argument for 3 years. It always ends the same way, with a compromise, a solution, a rescheduled plan. But nothing shifts. No new layer, no deeper understanding. She tries to revisit it with new words, more vulnerability, different tone. He says, "We've talked about this a million times. Can we just move on?" And that's the moment she realizes he's great at solving problems, but not at transforming inside them. One night she tells him, "I don't think I'm the same person I was when we met." He looks startled, then quiet. "But I still love you," he says. And she believes him. But he doesn't ask who she's becoming, doesn't ask what's changing, doesn't ask what her love looks like now or what she fears. His love stays rooted in who she's been. And that's the heartbreak, being loved for your past, but never joined in your unfolding. She journals at night, reads books on shadow work, listens to podcasts on intimacy. He's always supportive, brings her tea, leaves her to her space, but he never engages. Never says, "Teach me what you're learning." Never says, "How has this changed the way you see us?" Her growth becomes something he makes room for, but never enters. And after a while, her inner world feels like a separate life she's living beside him, not with him. They run a beautiful life together. They're admired for it. Friends say, "You two are solid," and they are. But when she breaks down one day and says, "I don't want to just survive with you. I want to transform with you," he looks at her like she's complicating what works. She feels the distance then, not in the miles between them, but in the fact that he's walking in circles around a garden she's trying to plant deeper roots in. He shows up every night, texts back, makes time, fulfills promises. But when she asks, "What's something you've unlearned lately?" he hesitates. "I don't know. I've been pretty steady." She realizes then he hasn't asked himself a new question in months, hasn't reflected, hasn't dared to shift. His love remains where it began, safe, routine, practical. But her love is stretching, becoming, risking. And now it's starting to outgrow the room he keeps building for yesterday's version of her. She tries to initiate something, therapy, a workshop, a new kind of intimacy. He says, "Why? Things are fine." And that's when the grief sharpens. Because they are fine. But fine begins to feel like a room with no windows. A kind of gentle suffocation. Not because he's unloving, but because his love refuses to evolve. And love that won't grow can only contain you, never accompany you. And perhaps the most devastating realization, when you're loved with effort, with presence, with consistency, but not with courage. You are not unloved, but your growth is unmet. You are building something from the inside out, and they keep showing up to repaint the old walls. And even the strongest foundation will crack beneath a love that builds around you, but never with you. Because movement is not the same as progress. And love, without transformation, is just memory wearing new clothes. Intimacy, activity without kindness. When the relationship never stops moving, but the tone no longer feels safe. There are lovers who do everything. They plan the trip, they show up on time, they remember your schedule, fix the sink, keep the house running, meet every practical need. They are active. Always handling, always moving, always efficient. But somewhere along the way, the softness goes missing. The warmth fades. The sweetness that once made all that doing feel like care is replaced with edge, with critique, with tension. And slowly you begin to feel like you're living in a partnership that runs well, but never rests gently. At first, it feels impressive. They're capable, dependable. There's a rhythm to life together. You're never forgotten, never stranded, never unsupported in the literal sense. But then you start to notice. They ask if you took care of something, but not how you're feeling. They correct your mistakes more than they celebrate your effort. They follow through on plans, but rarely pause to be kind. Their love is present, but not gentle. Their care is constant, but never tender. You spill something on the counter. They sigh. Not loudly, but just enough. You make a wrong turn on the way somewhere, and they point it out, not with cruelty, but with clipped efficiency. You cook a meal, and they say, "You know you didn't need to do that," instead of "thank you." None of it is overtly harsh, but over time, the edges add up, and your body starts to anticipate the cold more than the comfort. Sometimes they're tired, and it shows. Not in words, but in tone, in the way they toss the keys down, in the way they say, "Can we not do this right now?" when you were just trying to connect. You tell yourself they've had a long day. You give them space, but that space becomes the rule, not the exception. And you start to wonder why someone who does so much for you feels so hard to relax with. You try to name it. "I miss the softness," you say. They look confused. "But I do everything for us," they respond, and they do. But what they don't see is how often their love lands like pressure, like perfection, like walking beside someone who's always thinking one step ahead, but never looking at you kindly in the moment. The relationship moves, but it doesn't soothe. You remember the early days, how they used to reach for your hand just to anchor you, how their voice melted when they said your name, how their care came wrapped in gentleness, not just structure. Now they say, "Did you get the thing done?" instead of "How did that go?" They ask, "What's next?" instead of "How are you?" Their presence has become directional, task-driven, and your spirit starts to feel like a to-do list they're managing, not a person they're cherishing. You begin to hesitate before asking for anything, not because they'll say no, but because of how they'll say yes. The sigh, the half-listening, the fine. You start doing things yourself, even when you're tired, because you miss being met with enthusiasm, with willingness, with the kind of giving that feels like love, not obligation. Sometimes you wonder if you're being too sensitive, if you should be grateful for a partner who shows up, who helps, who never drops the ball. But then you remember, love is more than reliability. It's tone, it's touch. It's the way someone closes the door behind you or hands you a plate or speaks your name. And when all that softens into function, something sacred starts to disappear. And perhaps the hardest kind of depletion, when the one who shows up for you never lights up for you. You are not uncared for, but you are unglowed at. Their love is in motion, but their kindness is missing. And even the most consistent relationship begins to feel unsafe when nothing in it is warm, because activity without kindness is a system. And no matter how well a system runs, it can never make you feel held. She drops a dish in the sink. It clatters, not shattering, but loud enough to startle. He's at the counter, pouring coffee. He doesn't turn around, doesn't ask if she's okay, just says, "You really need to be more careful." She blinks, not because it was cruel, but because it wasn't kind. It's a small moment, but not the first. And as she wipes the counter in silence, her heart absorbs something colder than anger, the realization that he always helps, but rarely softens. They run errands together, crossing things off the list. At the store, she reaches for the wrong brand of something. He corrects her, says, "That's not the one we use, remember?" Not with contempt, just clipped. Practical, efficient. She puts it back and wonders when every shared action started feeling like performance management instead of companionship. He includes her in everything, but never melts toward her. One morning, she makes the bed before he's out of the shower. Folds his hoodie on the pillow. He walks out and says, "You didn't have to do that," while grabbing his phone. She says nothing, but stands a little too long near the window. The kindness in her gesture was invisible to him, acknowledged as function, not feeling. And that, more than anything, begins to erode her joy. He always helps clean up after dinner. They do it side by side, in sync. But she notices how he never touches her back when passing. Never smiles at her while washing dishes. Never jokes or flirts or says, "I love this meal." The kitchen is a place of teamwork, not tenderness. And when they sit down afterward, she feels strangely alone, like she's in a shared routine with someone who stops seeing her as someone to be cherished. She gets home from a long day. Her eyes are heavy, her body slow. He greets her, says, "You're late." Not harsh, just factual. Then adds, "Did you get that thing handled?" She nods, wonders if he even looked at her, wonders if he noticed the fatigue in her voice, the quiet plea in her posture. He continues telling her about his day and she listens, because he always shows up, but he never softens the moment, never gives her a gentle landing. Sometimes she breaks, just a little. Tears in her eyes, voice trembling. He hands her a tissue, rubs her shoulder for a second, then says, "Let's make a plan to deal with it." She nods, grateful. But the part of her that needed to be held is left untouched. He's active in solutions, absent in soothing. She doesn't want less support. She wants more kindness in the support, more heart in the hand. He's never harsh, never explosive, but he's impatient in small ways, sighs when she forgets something, raises an eyebrow when she's late. He always does what's needed, but the way he does it leaves bruises she can't explain. Because when love comes without warmth, without tone, without gentleness, it begins to feel like expectation, like presence without welcome. She tries to bring it up. "I miss softness," she says. He frowns. "I do so much," he replies. "What else do you want?" She hesitates. Because what she wants isn't more action. It's less edge. It's being seen with wonder, not just attention. Being spoken to with patience, not just promptness. It's the moment he hands her her coat and says, "Here, love," instead of, "You forgot this." She wants to feel like he likes caring for her, not like he's managing her life. And perhaps the most invisible wound, when love never forgets to show up, but always forgets to be gentle. You are not unloved, but you are unsoftened. Their presence is dependable, but never tender. And the pain isn't in what they fail to do, it's in how they do it. Because even the most well-executed life together becomes a kind of loneliness when everything works, but nothing feels warm. Kindness is the breath in the body of love, and without it, love moves. But it never lands. Intimacy, activity without allowance. When you're always doing together, but never fully being yourself. There are lovers who are always on the move. They make plans, they show up, they organize the calendar, book the dinners, initiate projects, suggest new adventures. They're full of energy and initiative. And for a while, it feels exciting. Like life with them will always have direction, momentum, color. But eventually, you realize something subtle but suffocating. There's no space for who you actually are. Their love is full of motion, but none of it pauses to make room for you. At first, it's intoxicating. You feel seen through action. They surprise you with trips, push you to try new things, involve you in everything. You feel chosen, integrated, part of a life being built. But as time passes, you begin to notice your preferences are rarely asked. Your no's are quietly overridden. Your internal seasons, the ones where you want stillness, solitude, slowness, don't fit their tempo. You're loved through doing, but never welcomed as being. Sometimes it's subtle. You say, "I'm tired tonight," and they say, "Come on, just for a little while." You mention needing time alone, and they respond with, "But I thought we were doing everything together." It doesn't sound like control. It sounds like inclusion. But over time, their constant activity begins to eclipse your own rhythm. You begin to bend to the pace they create until you forget what your natural rhythm ever was. You try to explain, "I just need a little space to feel like myself again." They nod, say they understand. But the next day, they're asking about plans for the weekend. The week after, they've signed you up for something. You feel guilty for pulling back, guilty for disrupting the flow, and so you go along with it. Again, because their love includes you, but doesn't always allow you. Eventually, you start to notice the trade-offs. You stop suggesting your own ways of connecting because they already have the agenda. You stop honoring your quieter days because they don't seem to fit the partnership. When you voice discomfort, they respond with, "But I'm trying so hard. I'm doing so much." And they are. But doing without listening starts to feel like performance. And love that never adjusts becomes a kind of pressure dressed as dedication. Sometimes you test the waters. You cancel last minute. You say, "I just need to rest today." And their response isn't angry, but it stings. Their face falls. The air shifts. The silence that follows isn't rejection, but quiet disappointment. You realize then, your autonomy is accepted in theory, not in practice. You're allowed to have needs as long as they don't disrupt the flow. Over time, you shrink your truth. You start performing agreement instead of expressing desire, not because you're being manipulated, but because it's easier than navigating the pushback. You become the accommodating one in a relationship that looks like teamwork, but feels like choreography. Their steps lead, yours follow. And though you're dancing, your feet begin to ache. You begin to long for stillness, for unscripted moments, for the ability to say no without guilt. You don't want less love, you want more room. You want to be chosen as you are, not just as you function within their activity. You want to feel like your preferences aren't interruptions, but invitations. And perhaps the most invisible grief, when someone loves you by doing everything except allowing you to simply be. You are not unloved, but you are unpermitted. And that wound doesn't come with bruises, it comes with burnout. Because when love never stops moving, there's no place to rest your full self. And even the most well-intentioned effort begins to feel like a cage when your freedom isn't part of the plan. She wakes up slow on Sunday mornings. Coffee in bed, windows open, silence as her prayer. But he's already planned a hike. He's lacing up his shoes, full of excitement, ready to share the day. "Come on," he says, "I already packed snacks." She hesitates. "I was kind of hoping to just stay in today." He smiles, a little wounded. "But we never get to do things together." She gets dressed, goes, smiles, but the stillness she needed sits like a knot in her chest. She knows he meant well, but his doing didn't make space for her being. He books them a weekend away. The cabin is beautiful, the schedule full, morning yoga, afternoon kayaking, dinner reservations. She's touched by the effort. But by day 2, she feels exhausted, overridden. She had hoped for reading by the fire, quiet walks. He says, "I just wanted it to be perfect," and she knows he did. But she also knows he didn't ask, he didn't wonder, and now she's living inside someone else's version of care, pretending to be at ease. She starts saying no to things more often, small things. A group dinner, a double date, a Sunday market. He always says, "That's fine, no pressure." But the light in his eyes dims each time. The next day, he's quieter, less affectionate. And though he never says it, she can feel it. Her no carries weight. Not the weight of punishment, but of disappointment. And that disappointment starts to teach her how to disappear parts of herself to keep his love feeling full. They do everything together. Workouts, groceries, projects around the house. From the outside, they're the perfect team. But lately, when she closes the bathroom door just to be alone, he asks, "Is everything okay?" When she journals in silence instead of watching a show, he says, "You're pulling away." She wants to say, "No, I'm just returning to myself." But she's tired of explaining that solitude isn't absence, that independence isn't distance, that being alone doesn't mean being apart. He fills their weekends with errands and plans, efficient, generous, well-meaning. But when she says, "I just want to wander today," he gets anxious. But we have so much to do. She compromises. Again, and in the car on the way to the store, she watches the sky and feels a sadness bloom. Not because she isn't loved, but because she's not free. And love without freedom doesn't feel like connection. It feels like compression. One night she says, "I just want to do nothing with you. Just sit on the floor, maybe share music." He agrees. But 10 minutes in, he gets up, starts fixing something, finds something else to arrange. "I can't sit still," he jokes. She smiles, but it hurts because she wasn't asking for stillness. She was asking to be allowed, to exist next to someone without having to perform togetherness through tasks. She begins to feel like a character in his play, cast as the loyal co-pilot, the perfect partner, but never asked who she actually wants to be. Their days are full of motion, full of shared action, but none of it feels like her. She's always on his ride, and he always thanks her for showing up, but never stops the car long enough to ask if this is where she wants to go. He says, "I just want to do life with you." She nods, tears rising, because what she wants is to do life beside him, not within his orbit, not paced to his urgency, not flattened into his schedule. She wants to feel like her presence matters more than her participation, like her preferences aren't interruptions, like her quiet isn't something to manage, but something to honor. And perhaps the most disorienting grief, When you are loved actively, faithfully, energetically, but not allowingly, you are not unloved, but you are unwitnessed in your wholeness. Their constant effort holds you, but also holds you still. And over time, even the most loving hands begin to feel like restraints when your breath, your pace, your pauses aren't allowed to shape the relationship too. Because love without allowance is a performance of partnership, not a practice of presence. And eventually, your soul will crave more than inclusion. It will crave freedom, intimacy, activity without giving. When there's always something happening, but nothing is truly offered. There are lovers who are full of motion. They plan the weekends, fill the calendar, suggest things to do. The relationship feels alive with dinners, getaways, shared projects, group events. You're always busy together, but slowly beneath the movement, you start to feel empty. Not because there's no effort, but because there's no offering. Their activity is constant, but it never truly gives. It entertains, it occupies, it moves, but it doesn't nourish. At first, it feels exciting. You never have to wonder what you'll do next. The relationship hums with shared action. Friends comment on how in sync you seem. You go places, try things, make memories. But after a while, you begin to realize you're rarely received. They're doing things with you, but not for you. They don't think to bring your favorite tea on a hard day. Don't hold your face when you've gone quiet. Don't ask what's been weighing on your chest. Their doing is external, performative, public-facing. It moves, but never lands. They book a trip, but don't ask how you're doing before you board the plane. They throw a party, but forget to notice when you start fading into the wall. They keep the relationship busy, but your heart, your body, your spirit remain untouched by real generosity. You begin to feel like a passenger in a very full car, going many places, but never met along the way. Sometimes it looks like effort. They're always organizing, always checking the list, always managing the logistics. But the actions don't feel like gifts. They feel like maintenance. They feed the relationship, but not you. You try to explain that what you long for is a small gesture, a quiet hand, a question that doesn't lead anywhere except closeness. They look at you confused. I'm doing everything I can, they say. And they are, but nothing is truly offered. You notice that you're always the one initiating the emotional pulse. You reach for their hand during the movie. You plan the small, intimate rituals. You remember their inner world, and they remember the to-do list. Their activity is relentless, but never generous. Never tuned into the quiet acts of love that require pausing, noticing, giving without task. You try to slow things down, to invite depth. You suggest staying in, making something together, talking without agenda. They fidget. They say, what do you want to do after that? They're already thinking ahead, already filling space, and you realize they're more comfortable in motion than they are in meaning. They're fluent in plans, but not presence. And presence is where giving lives. Eventually, you stop asking. You go along with the plans. You nod at the schedule. You let the relationship run on momentum. But your emotional body pulls further away, not out of resentment, but exhaustion. You were willing to meet in motion, but only if motion was accompanied by care. And now it's just rhythm without heart, performance without offering. One night you ask, do you know what I need when I'm overwhelmed? They pause, think. I figured just doing something fun together would help. You nod. Because fun is easy. Fun is full. But what you needed was their lap, their listening, their hand making tea without being asked. What you needed was them, not their schedule. And their inability to give beyond doing starts to feel like absence dressed up as engagement, and perhaps the deepest kind of hunger. When the relationship never stops moving, but you never feel fed, you are not unloved, but you are unoffered to. Their effort is real, but it's logistical, not emotional, energetic, but not giving. And that kind of disconnect doesn't show in photos. It doesn't show in plans. It shows in the quiet ache of being part of everything, but never truly received in anything. Because love without giving is just motion. And motion without nourishment will always leave you full of memories, but starving for meaning. She's with someone who plans everything. The weekends, the road trips, the dinners with friends. He says, I just want us to live a full life. And they do. But when she's had a long day and walks through the door with slumped shoulders, he doesn't say, sit down, I've got dinner tonight. He says, you still up for that movie? She nods. But inside, something pulls tight. His love is full of plans, but never pauses, never offers. He's always initiating activities, date nights, concerts, hikes. But he's never brought her a glass of water when she's crying, never rubbed her back when her energy's low. He builds elaborate weekends, but doesn't notice when her eyes go distant in the middle of one. She smiles through it, pretends she's grateful, but deep down, she feels like a guest in a relationship that moves too fast for her to be held in. One night, she says, "I just want to feel like you give to me sometimes, not just plan with me." He looks hurt. "I do so much," he says. "I'm always doing things with you." And he's right. They do a lot. But it's not giving. It's filling. It's constant. It's curated. And her needs, simple, raw, unscheduled, never seem to find a place to rest inside all that motion. They're getting ready for a trip he's organized. Everything's set. But that morning, she gets a call. Bad news. Her body changes. Her voice tightens. He hugs her briefly, says, "We can talk more on the drive," and grabs the bags. She nods, but inside she feels unseen. The day moves forward. The trip still happens, and her heart, still heavy, still aching, is carried like invisible luggage through every plan. He loves her, but he didn't stop to give. He decorates the house for the holidays, plans the surprise, hosts the friends, but she gets sick the day before, spends the evening quiet on the couch. He says, "You okay?" in between stories, brings her water once, but mostly he keeps things moving. The night goes on. Everyone has fun, but she feels like a background character in someone else's life. Not because he forgot her, but because his love was always about keeping the experience alive, not about tending to her when she couldn't match it. They're out one evening when she says, "I'm cold." He laughs, says, "You always forget your jacket." But he doesn't offer his, doesn't take her hand. She stands there, arms wrapped around herself, not angry, just missed. And that's the pattern. Her discomfort is noticed, maybe even acknowledged, but rarely answered. His love lives in awareness, but not in gesture, not in offering. He's thoughtful in large ways, plans anniversaries, makes reservations, posts sweet captions, but when she has a panic attack, he freezes, says, "What should I do?" She whispers, "Just hold me." But by then, he's already looking for the next task, already Googling, already pulling away from presence. She doesn't need more planning. She needs his body, his giving, and she begins to realize his love works beautifully in the light, but fails in the dark. Sometimes she wonders if it's her, if she's asking too much, if needing emotional generosity, unscripted, unasked for, is unfair. But then she remembers she gives that way. She notices. She brings the tea, the blanket, the forehead kiss in silence, and she doesn't want to keep giving into a space that only mirrors activity, never creates care. And perhaps the quietest kind of heartbreak, when you're with someone who's always doing, but never offering. You are not unloved. You are just ungiven to. Their presence is full. Their plans are vibrant. But your inner world is never touched by their generosity. Because love without giving is noise. Beautiful noise, full of rhythm, but lacking depth. And eventually, even the loudest relationship begins to feel hollow when it moves around you, but never toward you. Intimacy, activity without receiving. When the relationship moves constantly, but there's nowhere for your love to land. There are lovers who are always doing, always organizing, always initiating, always moving the relationship forward. They book the vacations, plan the meals, schedule the gym dates. They're full of energy and momentum. From the outside, the relationship looks alive, vibrant, structured, full. But when you try to give something back, your tenderness, your gestures, your love in its own language, it doesn't land. They smile, say thank you, then keep moving. And slowly your offerings start to feel like petals tossed into the wind. Beautiful, but never held. At first it feels like being for. They take care of things. They move things forward. You feel chosen, prioritized. They do so much, and you want to match it. Not in the same way, but in your way. You bring them little gifts. You reach for their hand. You cook something slow and meaningful. But they rush through the meal, glance at the gift, then place it aside. You start to notice they're good at doing, but they're not good at receiving. You write them a note, something small, real, from the heart. Leave it in their bag. Later that night they say, "Oh, I saw your letter, that was sweet." Then move on. No conversation, no moment. You don't need applause, but you needed them to pause, to let the words in. to meet your heart where it reached. Instead, the gesture floats, acknowledged but untouched. And your desire to keep giving begins to flicker. They'll drive you to the airport, pick up groceries, fix your tire. But when you try to touch their face and say, "I see you, I love how you show up," they brush it off, or laugh, or shift the conversation to something productive. You're pouring love into someone who only recognizes effort in action, not in intimacy. And your presence begins to feel ornamental in a life they're building around you, not with you. You plan something for them. A quiet dinner, a playlist, a moment to slow down. They show up late, distracted, already thinking about what's next. They say, "This is nice, but don't look you in the eyes. Don't enter the space you created." You realize they're so used to leading the rhythm, they don't know how to rest in your offering. And over time, you stop curating moments, not because you don't want to, but because your love needs somewhere to go. They say you don't have to do all this, and mean it. They think they're being generous. But what they don't see is that love dies when it's not allowed to give. You don't want to match them tit for tat. You want to be received, held, met in the way you express devotion. But in their momentum, there's no space. Their structure leaves no door open. And that locked door, even when painted in gratitude, begins to feel like rejection. Eventually, you start offering less. You hand them your love in small, safe ways, just to see if it lands, if it moves them, if it touches their stillness. But they keep moving, keep organizing, keep managing. You are part of their team, but no longer part of their heart space. And the ache of being with someone who shows up in every way except receptivity begins to hollow you out. You try to explain. You say, "I don't feel like my love gets through to you." They say, "But you're everything to me." And maybe you are. But being everything to someone who can't slow down enough to receive you is like yelling into a canyon. Your voice comes back, but it's just your own echo. And perhaps the deepest ache, when the relationship never stops moving, but your love never finds a home inside it. You are not unloved, but you are unreceived. And that difference is so quiet, so invisible, it's easy to miss until your hands, your gestures, your tenderness grow tired from offering to someone who doesn't know how to let it in. Because love, to stay alive, must not only act, it must absorb. Otherwise, the giving becomes hollow, and the one who longs to give will slowly stop trying. Not out of resentment, but because love cannot thrive in a place where it's only seen and never felt. She makes him his favorite breakfast before work, lights the candle he likes, puts his coffee in the blue mug he always reaches for. He kisses her on the forehead and says, "Thanks, babe," before grabbing his keys and heading out. She stands there a moment, coffee cooling in her hand, realizing he never looked at her, never said her name, never let the moment sink in. Her love was received like a routine, not like a gift, and something small inside her wilts. He's been stressed lately. She senses it. So she clears the evening, runs a bath, cues his favorite playlist, lights soft candles. When he gets home, she tells him it's ready. He smiles, says, "That's really nice of you," but doesn't get in. "Too many emails," he mutters, heading to his laptop. She sits in the living room, the scent of lavender still in the air, and wonders if maybe she was trying to love someone who never learned how to pause and be cared for. She reaches for his hand during dinner, just to connect, just to say, "I'm here." He lets her hold it for a second, then pulls away to grab his water, doesn't return to her touch, doesn't notice she's gone quiet. And when he asks, "You okay?" she says, "Just tired." Because naming the ache would feel too heavy for a night that was supposed to be simple. But the truth is, she's not tired. She's unmet. She leaves notes in his bag, little things, one-line love letters, a memory, a thank you. He tells her later, "I saw your note. That was sweet." But he never asks about them, never writes back, never brings them up again. She keeps leaving them until one day she doesn't, and he doesn't notice. And that hurts more than any argument ever could. He starts a project, something big. She shows up every step of the way, supports, encourages, listens late into the night. She designs a playlist for him, bakes him something before a big meeting. He says thank you, genuinely. But when her big moment comes, a presentation she's poured herself into, he says, "You've got this," and scrolls his phone while she practices. She realizes then, he appreciates her love, but he doesn't mirror it, doesn't meet her where she gives. and slowly her giving starts to feel like labor. She tells him a story from her childhood, something sacred, something she rarely shares. He nods, says, "That explains a lot," then pivots to a podcast it reminds him of. She's left holding the vulnerability alone, her hands still open, waiting for him to sit with it, to hold her there. But he's already moved on. And the moment, tender and small, becomes a wound she'll fold back into herself like a letter never answered. She plans a quiet evening. Nothing elaborate, just slow music, candlelight, a space to breathe together. He agrees, but he talks through the songs, checks his phone, starts making plans for the weekend while she's still finishing dinner. She realizes he doesn't know how to be given to, doesn't know how to let love enter him without trying to shape it, move it, or respond with something more productive. And her desire to offer softness begins to feel misplaced. She reaches for him after a hard day, not for answers, just closeness. He hugs her, pats her back, and says, "You're so strong," then pulls away. Doesn't linger, doesn't stay in the silence, doesn't let the embrace become a home. She sits on the couch afterward, wondering how love can be this present, yet still feel like it never actually arrived. And perhaps the most aching kind of absence, when the person you love never says no to your offerings, but never lets them in either. You are not unloved, but your love is never absorbed. It glances off them, slides past, gets acknowledged, but never held. And over time, even the most open-hearted partner will close, quietly, not from resentment, but from exhaustion, because love needs to be received to stay alive. And when it's only ever seen but never felt, it begins to die in midair, between your outstretched hands and the place it was never caught.